In 1966, Brian Wilson sat barefoot in a sandbox inside a recording studio. They thought he was insane. He was building a masterpiece. And this happened again, and again, and again. This is not a story about rock stars who burned out. It is a documented pattern. Men who were thinking in ways the industry around them had no framework to process, and an industry that responded to what it couldn't control by reaching for the simplest available word, case after case. The same institutions, the same silence where support should have been, the same exit. Genius was the reality. Madness was what they put on the file instead. If you've never seen this channel before, this is what we do. We take the icons everyone thinks they know and we show you who they actually were. Subscribe if that's what you're here for. By 1966, Wilson had stopped touring. While the Beach Boys performed on the road, he stayed in Los Angeles and built something the industry had no category for. The project known as Smile was not an album in any sense the label recognized. It was a modular system, individual pieces designed to be assembled and reassembled, repositioned in relation to each other like a spatial puzzle only Wilson could see. His collaborator, Van Dyke Parks, repeated the same account across 4 decades. Wilson's compositional logic was coherent, deliberate. Not the output of a man losing his grip, the output of a man whose internal framework nobody around him could follow. Capitol Records wanted product on a schedule. The band wanted something they recognized. The project collapsed in 1967, not because Wilson broke, but because every institution surrounding him did first. But this gets darker. The man placed in charge of Wilson's recovery was a psychologist named Eugene Landy. Landy moved into his home. He controlled what Wilson ate, who he was permitted to speak to, what he was allowed to create. The arrangement held for over a decade. In 1992, the California Board of Medical Quality Assurance stripped Landy of his license for what they formally described as flagrant violations of ethical standards. The treatment was the abuse, the recovery was the captivity. Wilson finished Smile in 2004. He was 62 years old. He performed it live in full to standing ovations in concert halls that had no idea what to do with the emotion in the room. 37 years after the industry declared him incapable, he finished it exactly as imagined. He wasn't the last. In London, another mind was already being prepared for the same story. Roky Barrett grew up in Cambridge, educated household, wide reader, the kind of lateral intelligence that the people around him registered before he ever picked up a guitar. Philosophically restless, operating somewhere most of his peers hadn't reached yet and wouldn't for years. He founded Pink Floyd. He wrote the material that built the band's early identity. Roger Waters, a man who spent 6 decades inside one of the most successful acts in rock history, was asked about Barrett decades after the fact and chose his words with care. Barrett was the most original musical mind he had encountered. What happened to Barrett during 1967 and 1968 was real. His deterioration was not a press invention, but the version of the story that survived in the public record was missing the details that change its meaning. The band's management made no documented effort to locate psychiatric support during the period when it might have altered what followed. There was no intervention. There was a replacement. David Gilmour joined. Barrett was, on at least one occasion, simply not collected from his home on the morning of a session. The institution moved forward. The story of madness stayed behind as a convenient explanation. While Pink Floyd became one of the largest bands on earth, the man who had built the foundation went home to Cambridge and withdrew from everything the industry had to offer. He painted. He kept a garden. He turned down every interview. He sent back every advance for an authorized biography. The neighbors who knew him described a man who was deliberate and private, not shattered, not lost, not the cautionary figure the press had constructed. He died in 2006. Not from any psychiatric crisis, from pancreatic cancer. In a house he had selected, in a city he had returned to on purpose. They profited. He disappeared. The madness narrative served the industry far better than accuracy ever would have. This wasn't an isolated case, and what comes next is harder to absorb. In Austin, Texas, in 1965, a 20-year-old named Roky Erickson recorded the first commercially released track to carry the word psychedelic in its marketing copy. His lyrics from that period were constructed with literary precision, built from sources his peers were not reading, threaded with internal rhyme and deliberate ambiguity that did not arrive by accident. In 1969, he was arrested for marijuana possession. His attorney entered a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. Erickson later said he had not fully understood what that decision meant for him. He was committed to Rusk State Hospital for the criminally insane in Texas. He received electroconvulsive therapy. He was released in 1972. The man who came out was not the man who had gone in. In 2010, at 62, the same age Wilson stood on a stage and performed Smile in its entirety, Erickson released an album that critics placed among the most significant records of that year. The intelligence had not been destroyed. It had been held down under 4 decades of institutional weight. They weren't unstable. They were unsupported. Peter Green was described by B.B. King as the only man who had ever given him the cold sweats. Clapton said it. Santana said it. These were not the words of fans reaching for hyperbole. They were the considered assessments of musicians who had spent their working lives measuring exactly that quality in the people they encountered. Green left Fleetwood Mac in 1970. No one in the band's management sought psychiatric support during the window when it might have redirected what came next. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia. He received electroconvulsive therapy. While his songs built fortunes for the people who remained, Green was sleeping in hostels. The institution that had extracted the most from his intelligence did not go back for him. The myth survived. The man didn't. At this point, the story the public knows ends. Here is what it never asks. 4 men, different countries, different bands, different positions inside the same cultural decade. Wilson in California, Barrett in London, Erickson in Texas, Green in hostels no one was writing down the address of. None of them received proactive support from the institutions managing their careers. Not one. The pattern is not a coincidence produced by bad luck distributed evenly across 4 separate cases. It is something closer to policy, unwritten, undeclared, but consistent enough across decades and geography to function as one. The industry did not manufacture their illnesses. That point needs to be made clearly. What the industry manufactured was the environment in which exceptional minds, without protection, without advocacy, without any surrounding structure capable of receiving what they were actually doing, became indistinguishable from breakdown. And once the breakdown label was in place, it was considerably easier to manage than the alternative. The alternative was comprehension, adaptation, the construction of frameworks around minds that did not slot into existing ones. That is not what the industry was built to do. What it was built to do is extract. And when extraction becomes impractical, when the mind stops delivering on the expected schedule, stops fitting the format, stops being legible to the people holding the contract, the industry finds the door. It leaves the label where it placed it. Madness, breakdown, lost. The people who carried the actual loss were the ones who had to go on living inside those words. Here is where the pattern runs out of places to hide. Frank Zappa never collapsed, and the reason is the clearest thing in this entire account. He owned what the others handed away. Dismissed by the press as a novelty act too strange to take seriously, Zappa had spent years educating himself in 20th century orchestral composition. Without institutional support or academic credentials, he founded his own label before self-distribution was a model anyone had mapped. In 1985, he testified before the United States Senate Commerce Committee and delivered one of the more legally precise First Amendment arguments that session recorded. The senators across from him called him a negative force. Constitutional scholars later cited the testimony in their own work. He did not collapse because he never surrendered the leverage that collapsed the others. He held the masters. He controlled the infrastructure. He built something the industry could not dismantle because he had never handed it the tools. Institutions are comfortable with what they can anticipate. Zappa spent his career making himself impossible to anticipate. If you care more about truth than myth, stay with us. Brian Eno left Roxy Music on his own terms, assembled his own operational frameworks, and worked consistently inside contexts that already possessed vocabulary for what systematic creative thinking looked like. He has never been called mad. Not once. Not even in the periods when his work was furthest from commercial expectation. The distance between Eno and the men in this video is not a distance of intelligence. The record does not support that conclusion. It is a distance of architecture. Eno moved through art schools, academic environments, international collaborative structures. institutions that had existing language for the kind of mind he brought to the room. The others did not have access to those structures. What they had was the music industry. And the music industry, presented with a mind it could not program for output, reached for the explanation that required the least adjustment on its part. He was brilliant. They could not manage brilliance, so they filed it under madness and moved on. With the question that remains, and that no official account has attempted to answer, is how many others there were, names that didn't survive into any record, sessions that stopped, minds that went quiet inside institutions that had extracted what they needed and had no further interest in what was left. We don't know, because the industry was never in the business of keeping that count. Wilson was exploited by the man assigned to his care. Barrett was replaced and permitted to vanish. Erickson was committed to a criminal institution on a possession charge because no one with power over his situation looked for a better option. Green was in hostels while the music he had written continued generating income for people who were not him. The excess was a symptom. The system was the cause. Or they weren't too broken for rock. Rock was too primitive for minds like theirs, and the industry knew it.